The Everything Sequel podcast is brought to you by 2T Fitness and the Vegas Beer Guys.
The Everything Sequel podcast contains explicit language. You have been forewarned. Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions. Say hello to everybody, Tom.
Excuse me. We're coming at this after having seen Return of the Jedi, where the Tarzan yell took you out of it. Now we're doing Full House bits. So imagine how much that takes you out of the Star Wars universe.
Just wait, we'll get a Tarzan yell back.
They put it back in to make it clear it wasn't a meta comment. It was a reference. It was a reference to just something that Wookiees always do.
They just constantly do it whenever they're swinging on vines. That's their deal. Well, here we are, Tom. We're going to talk about these three prequels in earnest. I'll bring that phrase back. Today, 1999, The Phantom Menace, directed by George Lucas, who, of course, hasn't directed a lot. We've got 6 Star Wars movies.
Famous as a film director who doesn't often direct.
Yeah, exactly. THX 1138, 1138, American Graffiti, and these, 6 episodes of Star Wars. That is, for the most part, his resume.
Yeah. And he directed 4 out of the 6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, as probably as famous for being the producer of the Indiana Jones cycle, as the head of Lucasfilm, up to a point, up to 2015.
Yeah.
So.
And as we said in our last episode, then he sold everything for the bags of money.
He did.
And people said, great, we'll start making shit right away, sir. We'll do everything you didn't want to do.
And that's definitely been part of the reappraisal, as partly if there is a nostalgia burgeoning for these movies, and I think there is, it's not just about us moving in time away from them. It's also about us moving in time away from when George Lucas made Star Wars movies and how that made them different and more romantic in a way that you just won't get from the Kathleen Kennedy Lucasfilm properties. And that's not to say, and then that could be for better or worse, but it's just not the same.
True. Right. Let's talk brass tacks on this movie. 51% on Rotten Tomatoes. This is the smallest percentage of for Rotten Tomatoes of these 3 movies.
Oh, interesting.
Budget, I'll say this. Well, we'll talk about it more, I'm sure. But budget of $115 million. Opening weekend, 64.8. In the USA, $474.5 million, and in the world, $1 billion. But there's something in my reappraisal of these movies, the budget. Yeah. All 3 of these budgets are right at the same spot. 2 of them are $115 million. I think the third one's $113 million. And there is something to be said of making movies on this scale. And clearly, we talked about how George Lucas doesn't want to go outside ever.
No.
And that part of his consistency with the budget is think about the movies at this scale. I think, the kind of Avengers Endgames of the world, those things are costing $250 million. Granted, that's in 2020 dollars or, in that area. But to keep a budget just over $100 million, I think speaks well of George Lucas, and to a certain extent vindicates him as being right. He could do everything he wanted to do on a restrained budget, I'm going to call it.
Yeah, and the elephant in the room is he just needs someone to write a screenplay for him.
Yeah, that's all he needs.
He could
do the rest.
He could figure out everything else. Yeah, no, it's it's not just that the budget is responsible, but it's also that you can see where it goes in the movie. You can See, it all factors into, as again, the thing I like most about the Phantom Menace is it's about building a world on screen,
Sure.
and all that money goes into that
For sure.
primarily. With no department is having to scrimp or save on anything.
Yeah.
Because the lavish costumes, the sets, the locations, the shots of space, the spaceship, everything it's all kind of cultivated. So it feels like that budget is being used well, as well as
Right.
well used.
But I don't think people give them that credit, because I think a lot of times people look at what's on screen and say,
It's a different kind of indulgence, right?
right.
It's an indulgence in a very particular idea of storytelling and characterization that no one else in the known universe has.
Right.
It's a perspective shared by no one.
Sure. Right. Exactly.
And at different times, that's very attractive, and at other times, it's really off-putting.
Mm-hmm.
It goes totally both ways, and that's like my conflicted feelings about this movie usually rest on that fulcrum.
Mm-hmm.
That you know it's gonna go one or two ways. Which way is it gonna go this time?
Yeah. 3 Oscar nominations for this movie, all the ones you'd expect: sound effects, and visual effects. But I do think it's interesting that
Best supporting actor, Ralph Brown. Sorry, Terrence Stamp, obviously.
I'm afraid not, friend.
For the best the best use of exposition in a supporting character, Rick Ollier.
But it's interesting as we go on, fewer nominations for these movies, and it just feels like there's
and more technical breakthroughs.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
That's kind of inversely proportional.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy.
And I guess we should talk briefly, because as much has been said about the release of this movie as the movie itself. The Star Wars fans lining up around the block to see it. The trailer, which was like an early internet release trailer. As well as being in the theaters, and people would go and see movies just to see the the Star Wars trailer.
Yeah.
That's what made Meet Joe Black a hit.
Yeah.
It was basically that you knew you could see the Phantom Menace trailer before it, and then the aftermath of that of the kind of vehement fan and audience critic reaction against it.
Right.
I mean, all of this is as much part of the story as the story we're seeing on screen. You don't think about Phantom Menace as being unconnected from those things. You have to.
You don't.
I
mean,
take it into account.
It's kind of it's a lesser Heart of Darkness.
Oh,
the documentary about making Apocalypse Now. But
the making of documentary is very very similar to Heart of Darkness or Lost in LaMantia, in the sense that
exactly,
it's clearly
right.
a disaster waiting to happen.
But I have a friend, shout out to friend of the show, John Ray. He was one of the people taking shifts, waiting in line. And I was working at BJ's in Westwood by UCLA, next to the 2 big theaters, the Fox and the Bruin. And I was there the night that the kids showed up with their lawn chairs and first lined up. And it was a good month and a half before the film opened.
Wow.
And my friend, taking shifts periodically with other friends, was the reason we got to see this movie at midnight.
Fantastic.
That opening, that very, very first showing. And I can't help but to think, I'm sure you want to talk about the 20th Century logo and the Lucasfilm logo, and all of a sudden the Lucasfilm logo is more important than the 20th Century Fox.
Sure. I have some questions. Is this what people saw in the theaters in 1999? Has George Lucas special editioned the logo to the the Phantom Menace?
I
I
think
mean,
it's
there's other parts of this movie that's been special editions.
that's true.
There's a new Jabba. There's a new Yoda from the one we saw in '99.
Hmm.
A digital Yoda rather than a puppet Yoda.
That's true. Yeah.
So I did wonder as sort of like, is it so? But if it didn't bump you, it probably was the one we saw in '99. I think, a little bit too young to quite. I don't have that level of recall. Although that's not in the Highlander 2 quickening zone
yeah.
of recall for you. I'm sure you remember it very clearly.
It does bump me. It bumped
For other reasons, but you didn't see this one and go, hang on, that's not what we saw in '99 in the theater.
No, yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah. It felt like maybe that was an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
That's my first note, and then second note is when the Star Wars comes up, I'm like, so far so good,
right?
It seems obvious at this point, and I think we said this about Empire too. You still have to keep making the choice to keep the opening the same.
Yeah, right.
Keeping it the same is a choice. At this point, you could have changed things up radically with the way these films open if you wanted to, but they made the choice to keep it the same, and I think part of the vitriol of the audience reaction to it is partly because they were set up in a way.
When you see that, you have an idea
they were set up
in your head
for failure.
Yeah, right.
And this opening crawl is sort of like, it's one of the most mocked and parodied in cinema history, I think.
Mm-hmm. Every time, if I ever watch this movie now, and admittedly it hasn't been often, but I think I might watch it more now, having watched it for the purposes of this podcast.
Oh, great! Well, something good's come out of this.
Yeah, but I can't ever do anything once the scroll starts but think of The Simpsons.
I have that note as well. So there's a famous Simpsons parody. It's even been parodied in the Lego Star Wars TV shows, which is kind of owned by Lucasfilm. So I don't know like that. But
trade routes, taxation.
But what struck me, like what kind of struck me this time was the real version is beyond parody.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't remember that taxation is in the second sentence.
Right.
I thought that the crawl in my mind, I would have said the crawl descended into Wall Street Journal style
jargon
journalism as it went on. No, taxation's right up there, sentence 2. And then the rest of the crawl's like giving with one hand and taking with the other. It's like battleships, Trade Federation.
Yeah.
So it goes. It runs the gamut from cool to civics.
Mm-hmm. And
and then,
well, there's like an unrelentingness in these three movies. George Lucas holds on to this idea of politics and senates and trade routes like with grim death. He is holding on to this as though it's the most interesting thing he could be showing us.
Yeah.
And it's the least interesting thing he could be showing us.
Yeah.
And he
not
never
gives
give
up on
a fuck. He doesn't care.
He never gives up on the Trade Federation.
No. They're always there.
There's so many reasons to give up on the Trade Federation.
They're kind of nebulous, aren't they? It's hard. It's weird because giving our understanding, we have a Senate. So, and we know that we have a representative from each state in the Senate. So when you go to their Senate, you're like, I get this. There's representatives from planets or star systems or whatever.
Yeah.
Why is the Trade Federation represented? But it's like they have so much power, they have delegates. But that feels kind of murky, doesn't it? I don't understand it.
Well, I mean, it feels kind of murky, and also, why is any of this in the opening crawl?
True.
Why, for instance, does it mention that Congress is locked in debate? Mm-hmm. Who's that information for? I mean, that's like something you would get in a piece of political journalism.
Yeah. Well, I remember
not an opening crawl that, let's not forget, were based on the openings of Flash Gordon matinee series.
Yeah.
Imagine if a Flash Gordon matinee serial went into, Senate protocols.
Flash is looking to buy the jets. He needs he needs a he needs a
He needs
partner.
he needs FDA approval.
Yeah, for new helmets.
And everything in the crawl confirms my theory that this would have worked better as a standalone Star Wars story, because
Mm-hmm.
if all these elements are just part of an internal story,
That we wrap up at
suddenly,
the end of this one film.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
suddenly these irrelevant details become relevant.
And it's funny because the first time I saw it, I can remember reading it and thinking, this doesn't make any sense. All right, I'll start the movie after the crawl.
But your
So,
reaction was the same. There's a great documentary called "The People versus George Lucas," which is a fan-made
mhm,
documentary, like a sort of mock trial of George Lucas, like trying the
right,
case for the defense and the case
right.
for the prosecution. And they go into the reaction to the Phantom Menace, and people's initial reactions to the opening crawl, and just the disbelief. It's like,
Right.
no, it couldn't have said that. It couldn't
Yeah,
have said.
exactly.
And then they go, and they did exactly what you did. It's like, well, then the movie will settle in, and it'll be a Star Wars movie. And when it's not
Right.
recognizably a Star Wars movie, they leave the cinema going, well, no, it can't have been that, and they go get right back in
Yeah.
line and go back and see it again, because they think they was like, I was just too overwhelmed. I wasn't paying
I
attention.
wasn't paying enough
It
attention.
can't have been this.
And
Yeah.
I've always felt that about this opening scroll. So sitting down for the purposes of our podcast, I sat down and I said, all right, I'm really going to read it
Oh, we like to break down these
and
crawls.
try to understand it. And then I found myself, okay, I understand all the words. There's no reason for them to be there, but I understand why they are there. And then I got locked into something.
Oh,
Why Naboo?
yeah.
Why this small little blue-green planet for the Trade Federation?
Well, if you go by the end of the movie, I guess the end of the trilogy as well, it's because Palpatine's from there. That's it.
And that's the only reason?
Not only is
I'll
it the
tell
only
you this
reason.
too. It wasn't until this viewing that I realized he was the senator from Naboo.
I know. It took me a few goes. It took me a few goes. It's the same.
I saw him get
It's
off
not
some
made
sort of hover
clear.
thing, and I was like, oh shit,
It's
he's
not
from that
apparent.
planet.
Yeah. That's why he's going back there at the end. I know, but it takes 3 or 4 viewings before that even becomes clear.
Oh man.
But what's really striking in terms of, you've been set up, you've got the Star Wars title, the music, you've
Mm-hmm.
got the opening crawl, and we and the Jedi's are like a footnote in the
Yeah.
third paragraph.
Right.
Literally, the last sentence mentions the Jedi's. So that's a whole crawl before we see a word that we recognize
And that last sentence
from Star Wars.
That last sentence is just dispatched to talk. Like,
Yeah. Not to fight with laser swords.
Yeah.
Although that is what does happen.
right.
And then, I've always, I can understand why people wouldn't have been as impressed by the opening shot as they have been for the opening shots of certainly Star Wars and
Mhm.
maybe even Empire and Jedi. But there is something to be said for the ship going past the camera.
Yeah.
It's kind of an almost inversion of every opening shot so far. It's like, and it's clearly there to show the 3-dimensionality of digital imagery, right? Because the ship goes past it goes past the camera, and so you see it from both sides, and it's a smaller ship, so it's trying to show the versatility of this new way of doing effects.
Sure.
But I can see why people thought it was underwhelming, but I quite enjoy it because in its own way, in a smaller scale way, it's a show of effects technology in the same way the original opening shots for Star Wars movies
It
are.
is, but I'll tell you what I was struck by too, because when I first saw this movie, I thought, these ships, they don't, they,
They're
it
very
looks like,
reflective.
it looks like the last Starfighter, and but there's a big jump from this movie to the second and third movie in ship effects. They look
Yes.
so much better in those movies. I was really struck by that.
Yeah.
And
And there's something to be said for this sort of like, this glossy mirror look. I think it's, as an aesthetic choice, I quite like it. It fits with the sort of
It fits with
early 20th century aesthetic,
mm-hmm.
the sort of aviation, the kind of the aviation chic.
But have we left Dirty Space?
Movie.
Because it feels like we left Dirty
Yeah.
Space in these movies.
Dirty Space is gone. Dirty Space is gone. It
just doesn't exist.
Yeah, Dirty Space is no longer the selling point. It's about it's shiny space.
Yeah,
that's what we're in now. And again, like you
might not
like that.
Yeah,
you might like that. I think it's a choice and it's an inversion. So
right,
isn't that we're supposed to appreciate that on this show? I again something that I don't remember coming in as hot as it did, a la the taxation and trade disputes. We're straight in with the racist caricature aliens.
Well,
Newt Gunray is pretty much the first person who speaks in the entire movie.
And that's my next note. Racist aliens.
He's the first face we see on screen,
yeah.
And it's a very racist one.
It doesn't sit well, does it? No, and what's amazing is it stays throughout. These characters are with us the whole way.
That's what I mean. Like, there's multiple reasons to move on from the Trade Federation, and listen, Lucas refuses to.
These characters are not going to be our only racial stereotypes in this film. We've got more.
It's the first example in this film of what I've termed retro racism,
mm-hmm.
which is something that Lucasfilm pioneered in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, where they said we want to so much be like a movie from the 30s. We want to have all the racist stereotypes associated with that kind of movie, and they're doing exactly the same here because this is racism through the prism of 1930s Hollywood racist stereotypes.
Right. Yeah.
It's the the sort of the kind of Ming the Merciless, and the sort of.
But it literally does feel like
Asian Menace.
Yeah, it feels like a World War II commentary.
Yeah.
But is it purposeful in that way?
No, that's why I
think it's
call
just
it retro racism.
Isn't it?
I don't think it's a blind spot. I think it's deliberate but not malicious. I think it and the same will happen with both Jar Jar and Watto. So this is why I think it's a pattern. Is that they're not stereotypes of, let's say, Asian people.
Mm-hmm.
They're stereotypes of stereotypes.
Yes.
They're specific stereotypes that specifically refer to pre-existing racist stereotypes in media. So it's one remove from every time. It's one remove from that.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens in Temple of Doom, where and I think there are quotations from certainly Spielberg saying, I wanted to have the racist feel of a 1930s film, and doing that, and to modernize that would seem to be totally misguided.
Right.
I think in 99. And I guess
1984.
I can see them starting to get the message a little bit about the racism by the time we get to Revenge of the Sith. Like the next time we see someone else from that race, they're not speaking with a stereotypical Asian accent, like very, very clearly. But again, it's Lucas fighting against himself.
Yeah.
Getting in his own way. He's like, well, it's like, okay, maybe it was a little bit racist, but I'm still gonna do it.
Right.
I'm just gonna make it clear it's not everyone in that species who speaks like this. That's what the second and third movies are just.
Well, if you take Spielberg's example, like Lucas would be saying, well, yeah, it was racist, but that was the point.
This is how we get to this is how we get to interdimensional beings in Crystal Skull, because Spielberg and Lucas can't resolve an argument about whether it should be aliens or not aliens. We see Newt Gunray, who, by the way, is the name and the character is a reference to Newt Gingrich. That's who it's based on. So it's kind of reflecting Senate politics of the time.
He was from the House.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Speaker of the House, Gingrich.
Okay.
Asshole. Not you, him.
Potentially both. And then the first appearance of the battle droids, which introduces two tropes of the trilogy: the busy look
Hmm.
of the films
Yeah.
and the unintentional comedy of robot design.
Yes.
And
And that's one of the big. I mean, this is a problem that Lucas creates that follows
yes,
him to the end of this film for sure,
yeah.
because they never appear threatening in any way, shape, or form for a
There's even
third of the
behind the
battle
scene,
we have to
yeah.
watch. You know.
There's even literally behind the scenes footage of him taking Steven Spielberg around the set, showing him a model of a battle droid, and going, "Yeah, but these aren't great because the Jedi's they just slice right through them." Like, wait a minute, you know that, and yet you
But I
don't
think
see it as a weakness.
he thinks it's a weakness for the Empire, not the Empire, but for the Trade Federation.
Oh, that's the other thing that is incredibly confusing about it being the Trade Federation,
Hmm.
is that sometimes they just refer to it as the Federation.
Yeah,
And
right.
as someone who's used to the word Federation in Star Trek movies,
Yes,
Federation means the
it's a
good
good
guys.
thing.
But so I keep having to mentally adjust. Oh, they're not talking about the good guys now.
Yeah,
They're talking about
the bad
the
guys.
baddies. And throughout this scene of the Jedi are arriving for to negotiate with the Trade Federation,
Right.
even now saying it out loud, it seems ridiculous. And they're kind of mixing in what is familiar iconography from previous Star Wars movies,
Yeah,
but
my note is
also
there's lots of
hitting you with what's new at the same simultaneously.
uh-huh.
So we get the Jedi's and the Hoods,
Right.
obviously Obi-Wan Kenobi,
Right. I wrote down we have lots of I sense talk.
right? We've got a protocol droid. It's not C-3PO, but
Right.
we're familiar with that kind of a robot. While we introduce, I don't know, 8 new kinds of robot
Hmm.
in this scene. Yoda gets a name check, and again, like things that you that you've heard before in Star Trek films, but are just said in a way that makes you question what they're talking about. So the first mention of the living force. I'm
Yeah.
like, is the living force the force? Is it something different? Is it the same?
Exactly. Right. You're
Is that what
confusing
people
me.
used to
What's
call
going on?
Is that what people used to call the Force, or is it totally different from the Force? And I think it doesn't help that even they call the trade dispute trivial.
Hmm.
So it's like that's a dangerous game of making the the
The central clog in your story,
yeah, yeah.
calling it trivial.
Then we first see the Emperor, or Darth Sidious,
Hmm.
which
Or
is
Palpatine. Or
or
one of his many,
Palpatine.
many, many, many different names.
Well, he's to an audience who's seen Return of the Jedi, he's recognizably the Emperor by a different name.
Yeah.
Also, they play his musical theme, so that
That
helps with the
helps
identification. And
in
he,
case you're behind the times a little
yeah,
bit.
behind the 8 ball. And we're used to him appearing via hologram, so none of this is any surprise to us.
Sure.
But this is where it's revealed for the first time that Darth is a title, not just
Yeah,
Darth Vader's
exactly.
first name.
All
The
right.
first time. And now
And we're deep into the series right now.
yeah. So they're throwing a lot of new, revised, and legacy mythology at you simultaneously in these scenes.
Well, and I mean, not right now, but we're going to get more mythology from the dark side later about, but it makes no sense.
Well,
Like
the
what?
Sith are brand new as well.
Yeah, so you can have,
They've never
and
existed
that's what I'm
before.
speaking to directly is the Sith. Why do the Sith always just have a master and an apprentice, and that's it, just two?
Um, it's not a good business model. It's the worst. Not only is that the worst organizational model ever. Also, the other kind of rule of the Sith is that the apprentice always kills the master. So
Yeah,
how have they lasted for so long? No wonder they disappeared for generations.
yeah,
They keep killing each other off. And again, like we've so again, there's this mixture of kind of wordy, political drama. Well, it's not even political drama. It's like wordy, just kind of political business
hmm
and total schlock.
yeah.
Like clashing hard. So the Trade Federation, they're so much concerned about what's legal or and not.
Yes.
It's like, what, they're like, there's all these constitutional prevarications, and all they're really doing is, do we kill the Jedi Knights or not? That's what they're
Yeah,
saying.
exactly.
But they dress it up in in these constitutional terms.
I'm not going to do this. I'm
Yeah,
not going to do that. They keep saying things like that. Or,
yeah,
should we do this? Can we do that? Is it legal to do this?
right. Like
Meanwhile,
this
Darth is
lawyerly
going to get on the
dialogue.
hologram and say, kill them.
Yeah, but I like, after a very slow start, the action ramps up quickly and gets schlocky fast. So there's an explosion, lightsabers, poison gas, killer robots
Yeah.
coming at you, and I feel like there's lots of narrative hurdles in this movie to engagement, and I feel like this is, once we got to this, I think there must have been a sigh of relief in the audience of like, oh, okay, good. But it's it's a
I
temporary
can stop
feeling.
thinking about trade routes.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got battle droids that look like Bugs Bunny, talking comedic high-pitched voices and reference jokes from Airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're
You're good.
not being taken seriously.
Well, can we talk about that for a moment? Well, maybe I'll save it for Jar Jar. I mean, we're almost there anyway, but...
Oh, but I don't think so.
Come on, Tom. They cut some robots off and they stow away.
Well, yeah, but it's interesting because we get the legacy lightsabers,
Mm-hmm.
but they're like more and less impressive simultaneously.
Explain that.
Well, they hack straight through those robot parts.
Sure.
Like a knife through butter. And and then they struggle to penetrate that metal door. It's also like a...
They don't struggle to get through the door. The door is just thick.
All right. But it was just like the kind of any sort of... all the mystique of it was drained out, and it felt like a demonstration of what it can do, in the same way you get like a late night infomercial for a Ginsu knife. It's like, it cuts through metal.
Right.
It cuts through knives.
I feel the same way about that with the Jedi in general. Because now effects have gotten to a place where they can jump more. Why? Because we can handle that effect-wise better. They can make things fly at you easier. Why? Because I can do that digitally now.
Yeah.
There was a restraint in the first 3 movies that I think really helped all Jedi powers and grounded them a little bit more. And here, you start seeing the unraveling of that, because Lucas, in his mind, they could always do so much more. And now he can do more, or at least thinks he can do more with the effects-wise. But there's something that doesn't sit right with me with any of it. It does seem to cheapen it a little bit.
Yeah, we see some in this scene, some CGI jumping, which
right
doesn't look good there. It's never looked good.
Yeah,
I saw a movie last week that had some CGI jumping, and it looked terrible. Might have been made by the same production company. Who knows?
I was gonna say some CGI train hopping.
Perhaps. But at this point, they still know when to cut back to live action when they do stuff like that. And that's what kind of strikes me going back to this movie, that there's enough going on practically.
Well, that's one of the reasons this movie is at the top of my list, because they can do that, and they can also engage with real environments more than occasionally.
Yeah.
And I think that helps this movie a lot. It helps ground the movie and make it feel more like a movie as opposed to a video game.
Sure. It's interesting, like, that another accusation in this movie that I sort of more or less agree with is, well, at least for large periods of the movie, there's no character development. It's just the characters narrating the story through dialogue.
Yeah.
So the characters are essentially an extension of the opening crawl.
Right.
And yet, you going back to what you were saying in the ranking episode about strong actors, a much maligned line, the negotiations were short.
Mm-hmm.
Even with this lame duck of a line, McGregor still captures this kind of whimsy of Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
that we're all looking for in the character, but they're very much working against the material, not with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have more to say about that later with other actors. I don't.
It's a good start. Like I remember, like I remember Ewan McGregor feeling anonymous in this movie, but when I go back to it, there's a few moments when there's a little twinkle in his eye.
Mm-hmm.
Probably because he's interacting with another human, and most of the rest of the time
Right.
he's does nothing. He's reacting to nothing.
Yeah. That's the thing that I think holds back this movie the most is that even really good actors, I'll give this to, Liam Neeson. I think does it the best out of anybody. But
Although he's clearly having a terrible time.
Yeah,
You can
right.
see it written all over his face.
Exactly.
And he did. So much so he refused to come back for what was clearly a scene written for him in the third movie.
Right. Exactly. And that's
and doesn't work without him in it.
Yeah. You need that end of Jedi appearance.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, to the point, the other actors struggle, and a lot of these people are good actors. Ewan McGregor gets much better in the second and third movies.
He gets more comfortable. I'd still say he's still working hard to do that tightrope of prequel acting where you've got enough of the actor who previously played the role and enough of what you bring to it. And there are moments like this when I'm like, oh, the line's not terribly good, but I like the little half smile he does and the sense of mischief, which is one of the things we associate with Alec Guinness's take on the role.
Yeah.
And it was a wise kind of choice to slip in there. Then we go to Naboo.
Mm-hmm.
For the first but not the last time in this movie. Keep going back to Naboo.
Always in Naboo.
The introduction of Queen Amidala, also, we think.
Yeah, who does he think he's fooling? Who is he trying to fool? Does he think he's fooling us?
Who?
Lucas. There's never a moment when I don't know.
I was like, is Queen Amidala a man?
Yeah, no.
That was a whole nother level.
There's never a moment where I don't know whether I am watching Natalie Portman or Keira Knightley.
But my question is, what is the subterfuge in aid of?
Well,
narratively,
it's always just to. I mean, they drag this into the second movie as the first thing that happens.
And I know, in abstract, you go, oh, she's protected, and so it's like it's like Saddam Hussein and his security.
Yeah, exactly. That's all it is.
His doubles. But go back to the movie, watch it. There is not one moment where her being her double
somebody else makes any difference. No, yeah.
The subterfuge is treated as something
grand,
like a brilliant masterstroke.
Yes, exactly.
And it's completely
anything
pointless. But obviously, I mean, she's visually striking. I'm a little uncomfortable with this sort of Asian fetish imagery that we've seen far too much of already in the movie, and her really arch accent, which still hasn't been explained. And it kind of has this sort of performance art feel to it, like it's a Bjork video or something.
Right. I mean, to the Asian side of it, it feels a little kabuki. Without a mask,
and I think that's what we know how Star Wars was influenced by samurai movies and Japanese no theater. So I guess that's no. I'm sure that's what Lucas would say as well. Naboo itself, I mean, it's kind of a digitally upscaled Italy, and I guess speaking to your point, there's a beauty and depth that we don't get in the later digital scenery.
Right.
That is all about it being a real location. I mean, they've clearly worked on it, put matte paintings here and there,
and that's the part that's
touched it up. But it's just touching up because it's just highlighting the kind of Renaissance look that they want.
But that's part of what's frustrating about watching this movie is because you can recognize that they're in a real place that's really beautiful. And then a lot of the pulled away shots, a lot of those are striking. I mean, very beautiful and amazingly done. And then you might be in a forest and you think, well, that's not a forest. That's a digital backdrop of horse shit.
Yeah, it really is. It really elevates the locations, even though they're hybrid. Still, just having locations to work from elevates the material for sure. then so we're we're in another political meeting.
We're gonna,
Uh,
yeah.
with the more characters just speaking to fill in plot points, and not even elegantly.
Hmm.
Oliver Ford Davis's character, and it's a line that's been commented on before, I think, on Star Wars Minute and various other fan commentaries. But he says the disruption can mean only one thing: invasion,
Hmm.
and disruption can mean many things. Doesn't necessarily mean invasion. So all that is filling in a plot point, and they're not even doing that
Well,
cleanly.
yeah.
Yes. Oh well. And at one point someone says this could lead us into war,
Hmm.
and I'm like, this is Star
That's
pre-wars.
my.
Another reason why this would be better as a prequel to the trilogy, because it would show how the war started, and then it could be, the trilogy could be the start of the Star
Of the
Wars.
actual war and stars.
So the
But you
Jedi
get,
stow away.
yeah, they
Go
stow
on.
away, but between,
And this is where we get the robot segue,
yeah, we get,
which is always delighted seeing, because they think it looks like a speeder from Return of the Jedi, but it just looks like, at the height of Segway mania, it just looks like that lesser episode of Frasier where Niles is on a Segway for the entire
for the whole episode.
they've just run out of ideas, and I think possibly the same year even.
It could be. Yeah, actually, now that you say it. And then we're gonna meet Jar Jar.
Yeah, and just before that, like, what are we, like? I don't know, 10 minutes into the movie,
Yeah,
something like that.
13.
And we have seen holograms of all sizes and shapes so far.
Yeah.
We got little people holograms.
Yeah.
We got full size body holograms.
Have we seen that
We've
spider
seen...
robot walking with the Emperor?
Not yet.
Okay.
No. But that will. Robot legs are definitely a motif in these
Definitely.
movies. But we've seen Palpatine. We've seen Palpatine as two different people in two different holograms
exactly.
already. It's like sometimes they're coming out of people's hands. Sometimes they haven't decided on an aesthetic for the holograms as yet.
Heard.
I think that is like, in the original trilogy there was. Well, I guess there's only really two holograms. There's the Leia hologram, and then the Luke's one in Jedi, which is full. But I guess maybe this is consistent with what we know about holograms in this universe.
All right.
I take it all
Yeah.
back. Well done, George.
You talked yourself out of that one.
You've connected the dots.
Just did a whole thing all by yourself there.
That's what it's like watching these movies. I have to. I taught myself round to so much of this because it seems counterintuitive, and then I think, why couldn't it be this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's talk Jar Jar, the source of possibly all the quotables for this franchise.
Yusa in big doo-doo.
We get the animals scurrying through the forest.
Right. We get
which is where
Qui-Gon
we see Jar Jar. It's
leveling Jar Jar and letting
it's like
whatever, the speeder, not the speeder, but the big speeder go over them.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the shot from Jurassic Park where those ostrich dinosaurs are chasing them.
Mm-hmm.
But with no visual unity of foreground with background.
Yeah, exactly.
It really doesn't work.
No.
Like when you see that in Jurassic Park, you're like, okay, they waited until they could do it.
Mm-hmm.
This feels like the opposite. They want to do it, but they're not going to wait until it looks good.
Yeah.
And Jar Jar's always slightly out of sync with the human interactions.
Right.
Which doesn't help the mountain he has to climb as a character.
Right. And so here's the final reason I ended up calling this movie bad. If you watch the commentary for this movie,
I'd love to.
What you're mostly going to hear is George.
I'd love to do a commentary for this movie. Go on.
What you mostly hear is George Lucas saying, "This is one of my favorite scenes."
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll go on to explain why it's one of his favorite scenes. And the reason it's one of his favorite scenes is because look at Jar Jar. He really, it's a full three-dimensional character taking up space with another human being. And it just looks fantastic. That's not enough of a reason to make a movie. And I think it's why he made this movie. And it doesn't look quite as good as he thinks it does. And when you listen to the commentary, you'll
No.
also hear the visual effects people that made Jar Jar say things like, so Jar Jar has to be in the background here, and it was really hard for us to make him.
It's like Rashomon done in the film
exactly.
commentary.
It's just they keep saying things like, it was really hard for us to just let him sit in the background, because we wanted to make him do things. And I just thought, what the fuck? You can't even just let him stand behind Obi-Wan? Like, that's what too much for you?
The constant movement is what struck me, and again, it goes back to it's like they think it's the most modern thing that's ever been in a movie, but it's so old timey. There's the retro racism. He's a
stereotype,
a racist Afro-Caribbean 30s Hollywood stereotype. There's even like actual precedents of racist stereotypes that he's based on from the animated world. The constant movement reminds me of old cartoons. That's what you had to do in old cartoons. That kind of dynamism.
When they used to do this, the old cartoons.
Yeah, when they just used to go up and down. That's like cartoon cow. It was like 20 years of just cartoon cows just shrugging their shoulders.
Yeah.
And of course, but the immediate president that they're riffing off, which is already 10 years old, is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And if you look at Jar Jar's movement in this scene, it is textbook Roger Rabbit.
Right. Now, let me say something nice.
Oh.
Because there's so much in this movie that is, you hit the nail on the head where you're watching Jar Jar Binks and he's a little off compared to the other people in this scene. It just doesn't quite work. And then every once in a while, and yet I still could recognize it as a pretty remarkable achievement. What they've done is I don't think it looks great. I don't think it certainly doesn't look as good as they think it does. But it is a jump. It's a jump in technology that is impressive. And then there are times, very few and far between, but there's like a half a dozen times where I'm looking at Jar Jar Binks sitting in a speeder or a car or something, and he actually looks amazing.
Yeah.
Just sitting there, not doing anything.
I'll go back to this when his introduction in Attack of the Clones. They figured out how to have him in frame without constantly moving or constantly juggling blancmanges or whatever, just so you give him something to do. I think by the beginning of Attack of the Clones they figured it out. The problem is no one wants to see him. So he's kind of written out of the movie.
Now I want to bring up something else. I don't know if I should bring it up until we meet Annie. Maybe I'll hold it.
Well, I just one more thing to say about Jar Jar in relation to that kind of asynchronicity.
Yeah.
That when he's running, and it speaks exactly to the visual effects people commentary that you were talking about. When Jar Jar's running behind the two Jedis, it looks for a second as if he only exists as a character in Obi-Wan's mind. Because only Obi-Wan is looking in the right place.
Yeah.
Like, Liam Neeson's way fucked, because he's thinking about, going back to his hotel room and ordering
what am I going to have for dinner?
Maybe I'll become an action hero.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't believe it's taken me this long to get here, but
I can.
This is this is our first James Bond reference.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
The underwater breathers.
From
Thunderball.
Right.
And it's so specific. Like, because, I mean, George Lucas, Lucasfilm, they've made a whole cycle of movies based on the Bond films. So this is no accident that the Jedis are using these underwater breathers that were gadgets in Thunderbolts. It's also a forewarning of how slow it's going to be once they get underwater. Right. When you start thinking about Thunderball, you go, "Oh, we're going to be underwater for a while," and we are. For a long while.
Anytime I watch this movie too, I keep thinking, I don't want to get in the water with a heavy robe.
I don't want to get in the water at all. Especially when the water looks that unreal. Like when they get it's almost like the like one of those old Disney movies where like a Mary Poppins thing where there's like an animated realm and a live action
Yeah.
realm. Oh, I suppose Roger Rabbit's another
Yeah.
thing. When he
It
goes
feels
into
like that.
Toontown for the first time, but not intentionally. But when they go underwater,
And they come
it's
over that
pure
little hill.
animation.
Yeah.
It's pure fantasy down
And the
there,
other thing that's amazing
and
about
that
that,
is intentional. But the sort of I don't think they think the transition is so drastic.
right. Well, the other part that really cracks me up, going back to the commentary with the effects people, they talk about that particular scene kind of coming over the hill and seeing the whole city down there. And they said, I mean, just for weeks and weeks, we couldn't get it right. And then we got this, and we all exploded with cheering and clapping, and we finally got it. And so to think that that was their frame of mind, and I keep thinking,
Yeah,
like you said, it's completely animated. It takes me out of
they
everything.
just want to get that George Lucas stamp.
Right. Yeah.
They don't want to get his Sharpie
Crossing shit
on
out
their
on
on their
my
original on on their
1,700 hours of work.
on their original
Yeah.
artworks. They just want to get that stamp on the white area below it.
Right.
It might be too premature for this, but I did wonder whether the shot of Ewan McGregor underwater was a callback to Trainspotting.
Oh,
I wonder whether like Trainspotting was enough of a cult hit because the most famous scene from that is
yeah.
he goes into the toilet
Right.
and then it has an underwater fantasy,
Mm-hmm.
and it did make me. I don't know if he's enough of a film star for that to read, but it certainly read to me.
I didn't give it much of a thought.
Transparent bubble shields.
Yeah. So you can't shoot through them, but you can walk through them.
Well, this is another motif if you across these three movies. Transparent bubble shields. We've already seen them. One of the battle droids has them.
Yeah.
We're going to see more of them, many more of them.
All the time.
So it makes me think along the lines of what you were saying about, the only thing that matters is getting the effects right, not actually doing anything with it. They could do this effect. They had to find ways to use it because it appears so much
so
often
often.
This film. I mean, again, like in that sort of spirit of talking yourself round to something that you immediately dislike.
Mm-hmm.
This is a deliberately different terrain that we haven't seen in Star Wars before. But that's the problem with it, as well as the innovation.
Yeah.
Because it's so unlike anything associated with Star Wars.
Well, it's a compulsion.
It's like Avatar.
Yeah.
It's Avatar.
It's so funny with these movies because they have two compulsions. One is to constantly go back to the sand environment that we know. Tatooine. So it's
George
like
Lucas fighting himself.
Tatooine is the
man.
center of the fucking universe. The other compulsion is to give us a different terrain in every movie and like give somebody something different to watch.
I just realized what this prequel trilogy is.
Go ahead.
It's George Lucas's personal fight club. He's Tyler Durden and whatever Edward Norton's called.
The narrator.
I haven't seen that movie. Yeah, that's he doesn't have a name, does he?
Yeah,
because he's Tyler Durden. Yeah, it's just so unlike anything even associated with Star Wars.
Right.
That it does really feel like this. I think in a movie that sometimes feels like it's not a Star Wars movie, this feels the least like a Star Wars movie. I think is what I'm trying to say. This underwater.
Well,
sequence.
this moment, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm the one that argues that this movie feels like a Star Wars movie.
I know.
This is the moment where I cannot defend that. I just can't in
any
way, shape,
and
or
I don't.
form.
I go back and forth because this is a performance coming up that I rather like when they break through a transparent bubble shield, obviously, into the underwater city.
And we get the leader.
We get an early version of Ewan McGregor's visible confusion meme. Which is actually from Attack of the Clones, but it starts here in the underwater city. He's got some visible confusion on his face. And then we're introduced to Boss Nass as voiced by Brian Blessed.
Well, and not just that.
And it's like, it's not just Flash Gordon like.
Yeah.
We've got one of
We've
the
got
stars
one of the
Flash
actors.
Gordon.
I forget his name. What's his name in what's the bird guy? What's his bird name character in Flash Gordon?
Gordon's alive. I don't actually know what his name is.
All right.
And this doesn't help this doesn't help our attachment to Jar Jar as well.
See, but that's the thing, is that I feel like George Lucas thinks it's going to help.
But what the problem is, Boss Nass is a more interesting character.
He is, yeah.
Played with the greatest respect for Ahmed Best, who's,
sure,
undeserved shit as a result of this film, by a better actor.
Right.
Who has figured out how to do this Gungan thing.
Yeah.
And this is the first of what will probably be many anecdotes.
Well, and I think
from the Brian Blessed autobiography, which I own. But he said, so all those noises that he puts in, the various, all the clicking, that was because he needed to find a way as an actor to break up the nonsense. He says this in his autobiography.
That's great.
He said George Lucas sent him a script and all his dialogue was nonsense. So he as an actor thought, well, what's the best way to disguise this? Slow it down and every so often do a noise.
That's amazing.
So that it might sound to the human ear like dialogue.
And it works, though. That's the thing. Because when you watch this scene, again, effects-wise, there are moments where he looks good, and most of it you think he doesn't look good at all.
Yeah.
But there are moments he does look good, and then there are moments that feel so grounded, I start thinking Jar Jar's not as bad as I think he is. But that's the actor doing it,
Right. He also tells the story of receiving the script, the Phantom Menace script, which by the way he had faxed to a I guess a Kinko, the version of like a Kinko's. So this heavily copyrighted, NDA protected script, he's having faxed to like a public copy shop. And apparently, like, it was coming in at such a rate that the sheets were flying out. So it wasn't even that he was in a public place and anyone could see the script of the Phantom Menace who happened to walk into that Kinko's. It was also that they were literally flying around the coffee shop.
That's amazing.
Asking to be taken and leaked on the internet. But he says that he read, like, he skipped immediately to his part, which is such a Brian Blessed thing to do. He didn't read anything before that Boss Nass, and he was convinced that it was typos, that it was wrong, that it had been printed wrong. And he called the production office and said, I think something's wrong. I think something's wrong with the screenplay. I don't think it printed properly. I think there might be a problem with your printers or your word processor or something. And then, they
just
sort of
find out.
And they humored him. They were like, oh, okay, we'll look into that. And then he went back and read the whole thing. And in context, he was like, oh, okay, now I get it.
That's amazing. All right, why don't we take a break after that great story?
Sure.
And then come back.
Called Absolute... if you want to buy it or... I don't know, rent it from your local library. That's probably the best first step. Absolute Balderdash is
Does the coronavirus have you feeling oogie? Have you been sitting on your couch for weeks? Nay, have you been sitting on there for months? Well, it's time for you to get back in shape. Check out 2AT Fitness. You can find them on Instagram. You can find them on Facebook. 2AT Fitness was started by Tina Bernard. She is ready and raring to go to help you get back into the shape you want to get into. They've got all kinds of classes. They've got outdoor in-person classes. They've got online classes if that's what you prefer. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to get back in shape. You're going to find a variety of exercises. You're going to have strength training, cardio, weightlifting, even fun 5-minute burnouts that will push you to your limits. So get off the couch, get into shape. Go ahead and check out 2AT Fitness. Tina Bernard has got you for all your needs. I know her personally. She's fantastic. You're not going to meet a better person to help you become the new you. Check it out. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom and I are discussing the George Lucas opus, The Phantom Menace from 1999.
the perfect description of it. Oh, it's an opus. It's his
It
magnum
is.
opus.
It's his version of a David Lean movie,
Interesting.
don't you think?
Is oh no, I was. I'll tell you what a question I was about
You
to
almost
ask.
turned inside out when I said that.
I know, but let me tell you the question I'm going to ask, and then feel free to say that's the most fucking ridiculous question I've ever heard in my life.
Fine.
Is this a more personal movie for George Lucas than American Graffiti?
Oh wow.
Is
I
that
don't
just
know.
oh?
You're.
Is that just overreading?
I think the problem with it is it's two different George Lucases.
Well, one is
Lucases.
biographical, the other is artistic.
Yeah. But you have to
I guess
consider where he
reality
was in
versus
his life.
fantasy, right?
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
what's in his brain was probably there all along, but it's two different George Lucases in the sense of this, struggling kid who's just coming up and trying to, with his buddies Steven Spielberg and Coppola, and they're all pals, and De Palma, and they just
Mm.
they want their dreams to come true, and one by one they all kind of happen. And American Graffiti was his dream coming true so that he could go on to make Star Wars. But once he makes Star Wars and then the next two films, he becomes a whole other different gentleman. He's a different kettle of fish, I think.
But in that respect, I think Phantom Menace goes back a little more to the roots of George Lucas because there's a big set piece in the middle of the film which is
Yeah, that speaks
highly
to.
reminiscent of American Graffiti and a
Sure.
desire to get back to that kind of filmmaking
Yeah.
within a fantasy milieu.
Well said.
But then you could say exactly the same about the opening half hour of Star Wars as well. That
Mm-hmm.
was him coming. That was his transition from American Graffiti to science
To
fiction
science fiction.
because Luke essentially is his own version of American Graffiti at the beginning of the film.
Hmm.
It's been said before, but bears repeating.
Let's talk about something that. Let's talk about something that made me hate this film when I first saw it.
Jedi mind trick on Boss Nass.
I went along with that, but
I
I
feel
also
like it was a bit
knew
of a character. It was a bit of a character assassination on Boss Nass. I think he was set up as
it
he
was. Yeah.
wasn't set up as weak-minded
Yeah.
in the same way that say Watto is, and yet somehow Watto is able to resist the
Right.
mind trick, and he isn't. I feel like it should have flipped that.
I knew it would have come back. Narratively, you can't do it with Watto.
Exactly, but character-wise, you
Yeah.
should do it with Watto and not with Boss Nass.
Right.
Because the last thing he seems is weak-minded.
Yes. What they should
At
have
least
done
at least
was
at this point, he obviously has some kind of
what they could have done was do a
brain
rule of.
hemorrhage
They
later
could
on
have
in the
done a
movie because
rule
he
of
puts
3. They could have had him try it 3 times, and each time it keeps not working. And by the end, he's like,
Gotta
"Fucking
say,
fuck! What's the point of having Jedi powers?"
and once again, my favorite variation is of the Jedi mind trick is in Attack of the Clones. 100%.
Okay.
In this trilogy, obviously.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
it's not say better than you don't need to see our identification.
Right.
That would be crazy. Go on, you were saying.
Well, I would say, the boss is going to make Jar Jar go with them. I mean, not make. He's made to make.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, of all the bad calls that are made in this trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
this Gungan may be of help. Historically, may have been the very worst.
Yeah.
Because what's interesting, Qui-Gon takes on 2 different companions, both of whom combine to lay waste to the galaxy.
Right.
Because Jar Jar Binks starts the Clone Wars,
Yeah.
and then Anakin begins the Empire.
Mm-hmm.
And so if
Terrible
Qui-Gon
calls.
hadn't-
It really,
hadn't-
it really puts
hadn't-
Qui-Gon under the fucking lamp, doesn't it?
if he hadn't have picked those 2 up,
Right.
I mean, I know I've talked about how tangential this movie is to the rest of the trilogy, but if you think about it in those terms, this is the most important thing that's happened in the galaxy.
In the galaxy, right?
That he ended up stowing away on a Naboo invasion ship.
Mm. Well, I was going to say, And I think it's one of your favorite lines, right? I mean, I was going to talk about "There's always a bigger fish."
No, I like the line. Again, it feels like a line that would work better in a different movie, perhaps an animated Disney movie.
Yeah, right.
Which is concerned with fables and creatures and
Well, that's the thing that
fantasy.
bugs me. This is one of my moments where Lucas can't get out of his own way. What I never liked about this set piece of the movie is they get into their whatever, their little hover boat.
Little life aquatic.
Yeah, their life
submarine.
aquatic boat, submarine. And they're cruising along and they keep coming upon bigger and bigger and shittier fish.
One of those fish has arms. I've never
I
noticed that
know,
before.
right, exactly.
And clearly, no one in the submarine noticed because if Qui-Gon saw it, he'd be like, "That fish has arms."
And so that's the thing that bothers me. He's so nonplussed. When I was watching this movie for the
They
first
don't know
time,
what's there, do they? They don't know
exactly,
what's there.
they don't have a clue what's there, and that's
you
a
can
fundamental
smell that.
problem.
Yes, it is.
And in other Star Wars movies, whether you're a Jedi or not, when danger presents itself, you're in fucking trouble. And to have these Jedi just not fucking give a shit grinded against me in a way. So it, like, the choice to do something effects wise that you clearly are not relating to your actors ends up causing a narrative or character problem. And so, it's like a house of cards. Everything starts falling to shit for me.
Yeah.
And it just, still to this day, when I see it, it just bugs the shit out of me.
But if it didn't have the burden of having to be the first Star Wars movie in a new trilogy, you wouldn't necessarily care about that. You'd just be like, this is another stage on their journey, on their quest.
I would think of the Jedi differently, though.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
We do Is this our first star wipe in the movie? It's a big one. We get a big star wipe to the space station at this point, which looks great. And I like this is where the sort of legacy genre feel starts to kick in. This abrupt cutaway from The Little Mermaids to something that feels like a Flash Gordon serial, right? And then that's all.
But also kind of feels like a Star Wars movie.
Well, the Emperor hologram
yeah.
helps, and I don't think we've spoke about Ian McDermott's performance as well. But he never misses a beat.
Never for a second.
In any of these
even
movies.
When he's hamming it up,
especially when he's hamming it up. He hands it up better than most actors would ever dream of doing. But even by this point in the movie, he's already called someone stunted slime, which is a line he wrote himself because you've heard the rest of the dialogue in the movie. Lucas isn't capable of that.
Lucas hadn't written that. What are you, crazy?
Maybe Carrie Fisher did, who was a script doctor on this movie. And his hologramic appearances are worth the price of admission alone. Although, once again, we're talking about politics and economics in historical democracies. I mean,
of course.
This is a film that's aimed even more at children than the original trilogy, and yet somehow, again, that Temple of Doom paradox. It's both more adult and more family friendly simultaneously, which is very jarring.
Well, but this doesn't go to a level that Temple of Doom does, and this is one of my major problems.
In this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a slave with a bomb in his head for possibly all of the movie. I don't know if they never go back to that. Maybe that bomb's still in him. He's keeping it,
but no hearts are getting ripped out.
He's keeping it unexploded with the power of the Force.
Well, okay, I concede that, but I guess what I'm saying is this movie, in particular with two characters, with Jar Jar and Anakin, this movie is aimed directly at small children in a way that none of the other movies are in the entire series, and I don't understand the choice. And I don't get at all hiring a 10-year-old.
Well, we'll go back to
appear
that.
In this
that's
film.
A bigger conversation. We'll go back to that, and I agree with you.
So,
but
I want to get to that at some point. But you brought up
Yeah,
this
no,
point, and that's part of my
I
problem.
see. I don't have a
I don't.
problem with that choice of directing it to smaller children.
Oh, I do.
But well, okay. I mean, it's not, it's not my preference. But
Because it's
they,
so
right.
overt.
But for me, the problem is the contrast with making everything simultaneously more adult.
Hmm.
And I guess, if you ask George Lucas, he'd say, well, it's the Pixar method. There's something for the grown-ups and something for the kiddies.
Mm.
That's why, because the adults get their Senate politics, and
Yeah,
then the
but
kids,
that's not
the toddlers get their poop jokes,
right.
and their farting camels.
And the Greg Louganis jump into the water.
Sure.
It's I guess the parts where he's going for the comedy, they're so broad and so young that they isolate me.
Oh yeah, yeah. The
And
comedy is
I
a
find
total
that
misfire.
frustrating.
Yeah. Apart from
And in the
McDermott,
end,
maybe
yeah,
he has the only funny.
but in
moments
the end, it's one of the it's another tick in the bad box.
Sure.
And I watched this movie and enjoyed it so much more. All three of these movies I enjoyed more than I ever had before.
Another way that you can adjust your brain and try and enjoy the underwater sequence, think of it as a theme park simulator ride.
Well, that's all it is.
I know, but if you watch it in that vein, then suddenly, you stop thinking, why are there so many underwater creatures? And you think, oh, another underwater creature, another obstacle to evade.
It doesn't feel like Star Wars, it feels like Star Tours.
That's I mean, that is a poster quote, sir. I also think, and I like this movie. I think it's a good movie.
Yeah.
I think that's also a little bit of an insult to Star Tours. Star Tours has a far more complex narrative than this.
That's great.
I love the fact that so much because this movie is shot on film, but with fully digitalized sequences. And when they come up from the water, there's the kind of it's like you go from one artificial world into another. Like the world, like when they arrive up on the surface, they're just like everything just looks as artificial when they get up there. Right. And I think that's hilarious. We haven't talked about yet. John Williams. And we talked before about he's got one score spread over a number of.
That's what you've talked about.
Well, you agree.
I don't know.
Oh, don't tell me that this invasion music isn't just him pulling from Last Crusade. The Nazi theme of the Last Crusade and the Naboo invasion movies is identical.
All right, I admit, I'll at least admit this. You can pay attention to those details in a way where they sail over my head. So you're probably right.
It's really funny, like in the...
But I listen to the Indiana Jones theme, and I listen to the Star Wars theme, and I hear different music.
It's the same. It da 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 da. It's that sound.
You lost me.
That sounded like Pop Goes the Weasel. Pop goes the wheel. Esteban!
I mentioned the Indiana Jones theme and the Star Wars theme, and you responded with da 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 ba ba ba.
No, the Nazi theme from Last Crusade and the Naboo invasion movement. Da 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 da. It's the same. But it's really funny when you see him in the behind the scenes footage conducting the London Symphonic Orchestra, talking as if his scores are in any way different from each other. It's hilarious. Like he says, "Don't be afraid to play don't play the volume too loud on those nuanced notes." And it's like he get a better job out of his musicians if he just went, "Has anyone seen Jaws? That's what I want right now." Anyway, but again, once we get out of the water, there are some just ducks, space ducks, straight up ducks. It reminds me of when you go. Have you been on the Jungle Cruise ride at Disneyland?
Sure.
like when you see that sometimes there are just real ducks in there, and inside
Yeah,
all the animatronic,
and it really throws you
and
off.
you just like you look at it, you go, "Oh, that's just a duck. That's just a real duck." And then the duck looks at you like, "What do you want from me?" And
Yeah.
is
I'm facing this way, my friend's facing
one
this way.
hippos facing this way, another hippos facing that way. Um, but anyway, the straight up ducks, which I guess brings us back to reality, and then the Greco-Roman city, which is
Hmm.
this medieval capital city, is again beautiful. There's a beautiful, you said that this is the best way to look at these movies is visually. There's a beautiful shot
Hmm.
of Queen Amidala looking out the window. So at that point, I was like, if this was a silent movie, this would have been the perfect image.
Right.
And in fact, someone did
There's a
a
moment
fan
of
cut
silent
of this
acting.
as a silent movie. They
Oh,
put it
really?
in the traditional in the what is it, the 4:3, did a monochrome filter on it,
Right.
made
Oh,
it all silent, cut it down to an hour and something, and worked
oh,
really
wow.
well.
All right.
But go on, what were you gonna say?
It just reminded me of something from, I think, the Sith. I think there's a moment of silent acting from
Hmm.
her where I thought,
Well, all
I
she
can't
does
believe
in that
George Lucas
movie,
is letting her do
all
this.
she does in this movie is look out of windows.
Yeah, that's true.
But I know I noticed that as well as the costume design is just going wild with her outfits.
Well, the Jedi's are going to meet up with the Queen and
Well, they get
they
so they've
formulate a plan,
the
right?
battle droids and the Trade Federation have taken the palace,
Yeah,
and they've got the fully digital battle droids surrounding them. And
yeah.
Oliver Ford Davis doesn't know where to look. It's really clear, but credit to him, he makes an educated guess and he nearly gets it right. Um, and then the Jedi, they arrive, and again they just start cutting through those robots like butter.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
again,
like,
so this is the weird thing about this movie. I feel sorry for all the wrong characters. So when I
you
see
feel
them
bad for
like
the robots.
slicing through the battle droids, I just think, oh, poor droids. And then
Yeah.
later on in the movie, like there's a couple of other characters. I'm like, I shouldn't be identifying with these people, but they're the only realized characters in the movie, and some more jumping as well. And we talked about in Return of the Jedi. I kind of that my personal complaint about the Ewoks, different
Hmm.
from most people's complaint, is that they try too much to insert them into the main action. That they try to give them
Right.
too much to do. But the opposite problem here with Jar Jar, because he's at the center of the action all the time, but he doesn't do anything.
And he's never doing
Never
anything.
doing
You're
anything
right. Yeah.
except turning around, juggling some
Hmm.
blancmanges.
Yeah.
It's just he's doing nothing and everything at the same time.
And part of that is probably the frustration for the movie as a whole because the first time you're watching this character and you might be frustrated by
Yeah,
him just by virtue of how he
confused.
looks and you think he doesn't look good
Yeah,
enough. But really your frustration is probably with he's there all the time and doing nothing.
yeah, that's it. That's
So there's not a reason for him to be there.
I don't think by any means Jar Jar is the problem of this film, but I think that's a problem with Jar Jar.
Well said.
Speaking of problems in sequels, Sophia
Hmm.
Coppola is one of the handmaids.
Yeah.
Not doing her reputation for problematic belated sequels any good here, I don't think. So, the Jedi do something here which is like George Lucas was a huge Star Trek nerd before he'd made Star Wars, and he does something that you see happen in a lot of Star Treks and Doctor Who's of old, where Qui-Gon, who seemingly is getting tired with just slashing through the battle droids, now tries to
Hmm.
confuse them like Kirk would try and
Oh.
confuse a computer. Like he keeps
Uh-huh.
answering the same question with the same answer, the different questions with the same answer, and you see the battle droid go and then he just
Oh
slashes
yeah,
through
that's
them anyway.
right.
But it's like a total
Yeah.
halfway house of you're not committing to either bit.
Right.
But it's like in a 60s science fiction show, a human would say 2 + 2 = 5 to a computer, and it would blow up. It's that kind of thing.
Right. It's Homer Simpson on the lie detector.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Do you understand everything I've said to you? Yes.
And when you see the costumes on those pilots that they free, it's full on
Mm-hmm.
matinee serial, even more so than the original. Like
Yeah.
it's like it's the space operas that I haven't seen that Star Wars must be based
Mm-hmm.
on. Is
Right. Yeah,
this
exactly.
because it's so it's like it's like the Rocketeer or something, that kind of.
It
Yeah.
does. Yeah, it does look like the Rocketeer. You're right. And we have a whole scene. It's funny because this portion. Well, not just this portion, but a lot of this movie, because there's so many battle droids.
And Joe Johnston was a
Battle droids.
Lucasfilm
Mm-hmm.
alumni. So anyway.
Yeah. But it feels repetitive because they're downstairs, they're slicing robots. They get into the throne room, they're slicing robots. Now they get into the hangar and they're slicing robots.
And this is not the last time they will all do the same exact thing on Naboo in the same place.
It's gonna come back in the exact same way at the end of the movie. You're right.
And they get in the famous reflective metal ship.
Yeah.
Again, not about making the coolest design, but simply flaunting an effect they know they can do. So they know they can do this reflective surface. In fact, we've known that they can do it all the way back to your favorite effect from Terminator 2, right? We're seeing
exactly.
the reflection in the
guy
in the helicopter,
the helicopter
in the
pilot.
helicopter, and they've just made a whole ship out of that effect, essentially.
Right. Well, and I don't know. It's funny because when I was watching the movie with the commentary, there were moments where they said, "So we built a little model here. This is a model."
Oh yeah, there's a ton of model work.
And there's so much model work in the movie, and I realized you would never know that it's a model because it's up against a fake digital background, and that digital background end up making your great model look like a digital effect.
That's true. It's a really good point.
And it kind of, it actually cheapens the model a bit.
Yeah.
I don't know how or why that happens, but to the naked eye,
Yeah.
that's what happened to me when I watched the movie.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. But from what you said in the ranking episode, this is where you start really liking the movie. As they're escaping from Naboo.
Well, yeah, I like... This is the portion where... This is the only movie of the three that I think has a really good center portion of the film, second act. Well, that's not true. I like half of Attack of the Clones, second act.
So many qualifiers there. I couldn't even begin to break down the number of qualifiers in that one sentence. This is
But this is the most complete film.
Oh, I agree with that.
In the middle of the movie. I mean,
so this is where I'll go to bat for the movie.
Okay.
And in a way that most people wouldn't try and defend this movie, which is as a prequel. The reintroduction of R2-D2, I think, is done brilliantly well. I wouldn't change a thing about how...
disagree.
Oh, I think it's perfect. What would you do differently? It's the perfect
I wouldn't bring him...
Perfect prequel introduction.
I wouldn't bring him back at all.
Well,
Two,
J.J. Abrams obviously agreed with
now?
you because he put him to sleep for 3 movies.
But I think
his
that
little ball went around.
So you don't like the ball?
I'm fine with BB-8. It's the marginalization of R2-D2 that I don't like. But go on.
Well, I think it shows a lack of confidence. I think it's a crutch that you have to go back to characters that we know and love.
But if you're gonna do it,
that you can't create something new.
But if you're gonna do it, this is great because it's the perfect prequel reintroduction because you see where he came from and you see the moment he comes into his own.
Yeah, but he's brave now.
So you see him. He's just one of many. One of many astromech droids.
Yeah.
And then they take them all out on the roof, and he's the only one that doesn't die. And suddenly they're all hailing him as a hero, and they're like the special little droid. That's perfect. If
I
I had to
guess
write that scene, I wouldn't do anything differently.
I guess you're right. I was thinking he was too brave, but I guess 3PO is more of the coward.
He's not. He's not brave. It's all a misunderstanding. He's just the only one that doesn't get blown away, and he's been riding
Yeah,
that reputation
but
ever
I'm
since.
saying the R2 that I know would be like would go out on that wing and take a look and say, "What the fuck? I'm not going out there. That's stupid."
But it's before he's developed a personality, possibly.
Get the fuck out of
But
here.
this is origin story, and they do it efficiently, and I just think it's a great action sequence. It's a great space-based sequence to start with. It's far better than what all the business he's doing with those fucking bird robots in Revenge of the Sith. Again,
I agree.
the worst version of this. It's all in Revenge of the Sith. Well,
all right, you might have turned me around.
I just think, there's so much you could say about these movies as prequels getting legacy characters wrong and introducing them in the wrong way, and this is an example of getting it right, I think.
Maybe
and
I'm
there's
looking
no
at the
dialogue,
coupling
which
of
is
it.
always a boon.
That is great, yeah. I think it might be the coupling. I think it might be R2 and C3PO.
Yeah, it doesn't work. I
having...
agree, and I think C3PO's done horribly, but
yeah, that's the part
I think they
that
just should have
introduced me
introduced
more.
Yeah.
And I'm probably connecting R2 to that unfairly.
But it's just a nice little self-contained
because
sequence.
it all feels a little too incestuous.
Oh,
and
yeah,
later on, none of this makes sense because Darth Vader's going to see 3PO and R2D2 in the original trilogy and not fucking recognize them. So that's bothersome. Like you write yourself.
That's not even the most.
Retroactively.
That's not even the most egregious example of
those
that.
Those movies worse.
That's not even the most egregious example of that.
Go ahead.
I can't. Well, it's in. Well, there's one later. There's one in the pod race in this movie, but I guess we'll get there. When we get there, Rick Ollier. He begins as he means to go on, just saying out loud what is immediately obvious. There's the blockade. Yes, we've seen it. And
there's so much of that in these movies.
But he is particularly. I mean, he's a live action Basil Exposition. He really is. If you listen to every piece of dialogue that comes out of his mouth, it's not only exposition, but needless exposition.
But one we already know, yeah.
Yeah, that's already been done visually. Maybe he's like for the hearing impaired.
Let me ask you
sight
this,
impaired, not the hearing impaired.
We're gonna get past the blockade and we're gonna go to Tatooine.
Yeah,
now,
we hear about the huts.
It's not this movie's fault that we keep going back to Tatooine, but do you blame the movie for going back to Tatooine?
I think it's one of those things that, in abstract, no, I think we should just forget about Tatooine for a while. I guess this is really only the third movie that we've had Tatooine in.
That's true.
Fatigue kind of sets in after
because the
Book of Boba Fett is
the
like
next
the
trilogy hasn't come out
Book
yet.
of Boba Fett is the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to Tatooine, I think.
That's true.
But it's a way for them to throw out some original trilogy references, like, it's owned by the Hutts, and we keep mentioning the Hutts.
Yeah, but we're not going to go to Mos Eisley. We'll go to a different port.
Mos Espa?
Justice Seedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget.
Mos Espa, I think, right?
Yeah.
And
we get another racial stereotype for a creature.
In between them arriving, deciding to go to Tatooine because their hyperdrive is broken,
right?
Which for some reason they can't fix. And in between that, we cut away and we get the first appearance of Darth Maul, who, we're pretty far into the movie, and our villain has been introduced in hologram form. And it's quite an underwhelming introduction to what will turn out to be appropriately for quite an underwhelming character. And that first mention of the Sith, so that changes. I mean, that changes everything. And we've had it for 24 years now of knowing this, but that reframing changes everything we think about the Emperor and Darth Vader. Because
why?
Because up to this point, they could be the exceptions to the rules. It could just be that they were, it just this these two guys found each other and formed an
Like
empire.
the Siths are normally good.
No, but these two could be one-offs. Now we know they're part of a historical cult of master and apprentice,
cult. Yeah, okay.
and that changes everything. But some big mythology moves in this movie.
Well, and we're not done. Yeah.
Did your audience, when you first saw this, did the audience clap when they said R2-D2 for the first time? Did they get a round of applause?
Probably.
I remember it very clearly. I actually saw this movie for the first time in New York, which is odd.
Oh yeah,
because I'm
have vague
British and I
recollections
now
of-
live in California.
Yeah, I have vague recollections of clapping for 3PO and R2.
Oh, not 3PO. I think by that point people were like, "Is that even 3PO?" And I like that too. I like that too because it was clearly, it was an applause moment, and it was like, this is give him his hero entrance. So I liked all around. I liked the way that they reintroduced R2-D2. I wish they'd have remembered how they did that and implemented it elsewhere in this movie and in this franchise. At this point, we get a. Yeah.
I guess, yeah. I still always felt as though it showed a fundamental lack of imagination for a man with lots of imagination.
But that's what's great about it, is it's so simple. It's like, what was he? An astromech droid. And at some point he broke off from that. And this is when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
Simple. It's like, it's just like...
No, that portion of it. I just mean having them
Everyone
in the movie
else
at
around
all.
him died. He was left on his own. It's like the beginning of the Living Daylights. It's like you kill
Yes.
that 00, you kill that 00, and who's left? James Bond. Scared of monkeys, but
James
still
Bond.
the best of the bunch.
Well, and then once we're on the planet and we decide we have to go in town.
Oh, with an iMovie clock wipe. Speak in those 24 years. Now you're able to do that on your laptop.
You can do it on your phone.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's funny that Lucas is presenting to us the handmaiden of Padme, who we know is not the fucking handmaiden, and I can't tell whether or not Lucas wants us to believe that it's actually her or not.
I think he wants us to think they're twins at this point.
I think that's what he wants. Yeah, that's what I kept thinking. Except, and there was reference like in IMDb notes about this movie that when they're both made up, that they looked exactly the same. That on set they couldn't tell each other apart. And every time they're on screen, I think, nope,
now that I know
totally
the
different.
first time, but the first time I saw it when Keira Knightley's in all that makeup, I'm like, oh yeah, they do look exactly the same. What I don't understand is what it's all in aid of. Like, yeah, they kind of look like each other. She's indistinguishable when she's in the outfit and the makeup, but
it just never helps until the first scene of Attack of the Clones.
To what end?
Yeah.
Exactly. Remember that. Also, when they go into town, you can't help but notice that this is an ensemble of characters made entirely of sidekicks.
Right.
R2-D2, Jar Jar, and Padme. And arguably Qui-Gon as well.
You could, yes. But the funny part to me, too, was you see some kind of lazy storytelling here because Qui-Gon's kind of in charge, even though the queen is the queen. When it comes to getting parts, Qui-Gon's the guy. And they come out and the guard is saying, hey, so she wants you to take this person with you. And he says, no, we can't do that. He goes, no, thinks you should. Oh, yeah? Well, I think it's a bad idea. And then let's go.
Yeah.
Because she has to go.
It's like minutes from a Senate meeting. I want to be on record. I'm voting for this, but I oppose it.
Yeah.
There was a theory. I remember listening to a podcast that was hosted by Paul Rust, and I don't think he came up with the theory, but he was talking about the theory that the reason why the dialogue's so bad in The Phantom Menace is that, it having been through the divorce process, like a prolonged divorce process, like all he knows is how to talk to lawyers. and how lawyers talk. And if you look at the movie through that prism, it's like scenes like this make total sense. It's like,
It
yeah, that's how
does.
depositions go, so I guess that's how humans talk. I haven't been outside in years.
That's funny.
I was really
Yeah, we're gonna
I was really
go ahead.
struck by how much more restrained Lucas is in the version of Tatooine we see here than he was with the special edition of Star Wars.
Yeah, I thought the
The
same
backgrounds aren't
thing.
half as busy.
The background aren't half as nonsensical.
I mean, there are there's
I
not
think
even
it's
more
so funny that
banthas, I don't think, than
yeah, exactly. So it's funny that he won't give us the original series, which we
it's
want,
crazy.
but he'll listen to the criticism
Yeah,
and
yeah.
take a bunch of shit out of this
And
one.
and
It's
Attack of
funny.
the Clones is all like that. It's like, oh yeah, you want me to do this? Well, I'll do it, but you're gonna have to take a bullet for it. Of something else, I think up in my weird mind. It's just like that all the way through. But I mean, this is where we get the infamous Jar Jar stepping in poop joke, which is later followed by a farting OP. And we've never really had toilet humor in Star Wars before,
No, yeah, you're right.
or again after these movies, or after
This
this
proved
movie.
why you shouldn't do
They
it.
don't do it
Yeah.
in. There's no point where Anakin has to leave a battle because he's got the runs or something like that. There's no scene like that. That would have been great, by the way. But yes, I've talked around this, but finally we have to face Watto.
Another racial
Another
stereotype.
racist alien, again based on racist aliens from past media.
Yeah. And we're going to meet Watto and Anakin at the same time, or, well, roughly the same time.
Yeah. So I guess we have to talk about Jake Lloyd. Well, this scene really isn't fun, is it, to discuss? I think he handles this scene really well.
Yeah,
he's cute.
so
He's
Jake
cute.
Lloyd
He
is...
looks right for being
Mhm.
like Anakin's Luke's baby father. He's cute. He's a cute kid. The business he's doing makes me believe he works there. And he's also got
I agree with
they've
that.
got the through line of him being a pilot and the aviation stuff and him tinkering with stuff, which is how we found Luke.
Sure.
I don't
But he's
like that
famously
he's a
derided.
slave.
Yeah.
Because that is an adult concept you don't want to throw into a kid-friendly movie without any follow-up.
Well, that's the thing. Okay, so we're at Jake Lloyd. So can I at least bring up that I think it's a terrible idea, no matter what was in George Lucas's canon head, about how Jedis work.
This is what I mean about
Because,
don't read the draft screenplay, because he was significantly older.
well, that's a better choice.
He wasn't quite Luke's age,
Mm-hmm.
but he was like 12 or 13 or something like that. Which is still too young.
How old was Mark Hamill for Star Wars? Wasn't he 20?
Yeah. I'd want it in between. I'd want him to be like mid-teens, I think.
That's what I said. I want him at 15, 16.
Yeah, I want him to be like an adolescent.
Yeah. And I guess the problem for me is because this retro...
by the way, this would all work at that age.
Yeah. Exactly.
Everything in these, you wouldn't have to change a thing.
You wouldn't have to change a fucking thing. And it also wouldn't turn Natalie Portman's Padme into a creep.
Well, so basically what's happened is...
And also it just doesn't work because Jake Lloyd in real life is 10 years younger than Natalie Portman. But Hayden Christensen, they're the same. They're born the same year.
Yeah, but the Force makes you grow faster.
Shut up.
Way to annoy you. Honestly, that is what I did. That is what I did in my headcanon to try and get around the bad taste of pedophilia in my mouth.
Okay,
from this.
Fine.
Oh, so it's
at any rate, I just think the whole thing is
no. You're right. You're 100%.
Is a terrible choice.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for Jake Lloyd. He should not be derided as much as he has been in popular culture for his performance.
Definitely not, no.
There are, of course, things that don't ring too true when he says them, but a lot of the work he's doing is fine. It's absolutely
It's
fine.
more than fine.
And even good.
Even good. So some background to this.
Okay.
And this is why, you know, if you didn't like it and you want to blame anyone, blame George Lucas.
I do. That is
blame
who
Lloyd.
I blame.
I know, but fans typically, you know, they target Jake Lloyd for not being up to the job. George Lucas he had a choice. It got down to two actors, and he went with the actor who was less of a professional trained actor, because he didn't want those professional kid actor reads that we all know what those sound like, right? So he had a kid who was like technically good but couldn't do the emotion, and then a kid, Jake Lloyd, who wasn't as skilled an actor, but the emotion read and the vulnerability read far more because he didn't seem confident like kid actors do.
Yeah.
So Lucas actually wanted that quality that people deride, of looking a little bit out of your depth and a little bit unsure and vulnerable.
Well, and it's also, I can't blame them, because there are trained actors who are adults who are struggling with the dialogue that George Lucas has given them. So I'm not going to blame the kid for not being able to do it.
It's so fun. There's a I say unintentionally hilarious clip from the behind the scenes footage where George Lucas and Rick McCallum are walking away from who produced the films, which means, you know, he said yes to whatever George asked him to do.
Right.
And they're walking away from them filming the dinner scene on Tatooine.
Right.
And he's like, "Boy, Natalie's so good. She's so good. I'd never worked with her, and you know, she's so good." And then Rick McCallum's like, "Oh, and oh no, it must have been the later scene." He said, and Ian's really good too. He's like, "Oh yeah, Ian's always good, and I learned a lot about Jake." And that's where it
Shit. Fuck.
So maybe even Lucas didn't get what he wanted out of this kid.
Oh man.
But I don't see any of that. I'm emotionally invested in his performance. I
am too, and
I'm not
feel...
ashamed to say I nearly wept when he was separated from his mother. Those things are hard for me now, being a parent. The thought of being separated from your child just will instantly bring me to tears. But
because I don't think the movie's not bringing me to tears in that moment. I think Jake Lloyd is
really works. I think it's so well directed, so well acted, that scene, even well written. I think all of it.
I think it's.
I find it really touching,
distant and cold.
No, I think there's so
what
many.
What makes a mother just kind of say, "My place is here, off with you." Not that she says "off with you," but
not her, him. Like, you know, I don't know. That's why. Even though they could have played it in a way where Revenge of the Sith was directly related to this, it's like so he has all this trauma, and that's a big part of why he becomes Darth Vader. And that they go so far with that, and then they kind of abandon it as they go on. They maybe mention his mother once in Revenge of the Sith, but that to me that would be the obvious reason why someone would turn to the dark side, is the trauma.
Yeah.
And it's such a and it told for me. Anyway, we're not there yet. We've got a whole
settle down, would you please?
We've got a whole episode of wacky races in between. So they're in Watto's. What's it called? Watto's junk shop.
Yeah, whatever.
Which is not stereotypical at all for for an anti-Semitic racist alien. It makes total sense that we have a junk shop. The pit droids.
I forgot. I forgot that
they were introduced here because they get a second act in The Mandalorian.
In The Mandalorian, and when I saw them, I thought, "Oh my gosh, I totally forgot that they were in here at all."
Same can't be said for those gonk droids lying around in a pile.
No.
But something I did notice I've never seen before. There's lots of protocol droids lying defunct in the background,
and
that must have been they're setting up C-3PO, right? So he's made of the parts of other protocol droids.
I assumed, yeah.
I never assumed that. I thought he was built from scratch. I like it better
Oh,
this way,
yeah.
but I always assumed that Anakin, the Force told him how to build a robot. My headcanon is very specific, isn't it? The Force made me do this. The Force
Yeah.
makes you do that. I guess so the pros and cons of Watto. It's my new book. So the Trade Federation aliens are racist looking and racist sounding.
Yes.
Watto is racist looking and racist sounding, and he is also the embodiment of the stereotype that goes along with it, which is there's this money grubbing junk shop owner. It's the thing that got Alec Guinness banned in Israel for playing Fagin in Doll of a Twist. It's that kind of style. I think the bit with the failed Jedi mind trick is actually funny.
I think it's funny because he tries it twice.
I would have, like I said, I would have preferred if it was Boss Nass, and also it makes me think of the Jabba scene as well, which it's supposed to call back to.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just like he just almost as a kind of byproduct of all this kind of business he has to do. And all we know about him, we get to know a lot about him, is that he becomes a more developed character than anyone around him who we've met at the beginning. So I start to identify with him out of all of them.
He's one of the yeah.
So when he loses, I'm like, I'm invested in
poor guy.
Yeah, no, a little bit. And then I remember
when he rolls the die, when he rolls the blue-red chance die, you're thinking that Qui-Gon's a real dick. He's really taking advantage of him.
But there's something about the way, he's voiced as well, which is slightly, it's pitiful. It has a pitiful tone to it, which especially in the next movie makes you, even though they make him more racist by giving him an anti-Semitic hat in the next one, but still, there's a kind of, it makes me identify, perhaps by default more than anything else, but still I get more invested in what he's doing. And I suppose the line, yeah, go on.
Well,
what do you think about Watto?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that I'm thinking back to when I first saw it, and for some reason he never bothered me as much as Jar Jar. I mean, he did racial stereotype wise, but not character wise. And I think that's more, the racial stereotype is more of an accumulative thing. Like when you look back over the movie and see how many examples there are of it, it's undeniable. But I don't think it's related to one character. Yeah, I'm trying. I guess what I'm trying to do is figure out why that is. I could recognize why,
because he seems more like a real person than anyone else in the movie.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
And even the Harry Seacombe's son, who voices him, and like I say, there's a pitiful quality to the way he voices it. That, and of course, you could have had the creature as this kind of huge, well, essentially Unkar Plutt from the Simon Pegg character from The Force Awakens is what it could have been.
Right.
But they go with the choice of making him this small flying creature, partly because it's more anti-Semitic that way, but also because they do want to suggest this little man trying to run a big empire.
Yeah. But I think that part of it kind of works in the sense of a character who's carved out a small bit of power.
Yeah.
And has let that amount of power go to his head. So
Watto has dimensions.
In that way, the character does work. You're right.
And it's genuinely funny in a movie that doesn't have many of those moments. So you sort of you latch onto it.
And I'll tell you what I always have liked, because shortly after this we meet Sebulba. I always liked that character. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That surprises me.
There's something about the way he moves.
I mean, it's definitely
he's one of the least offensive 3D characters to me.
And that's another great vocal performance. That might also be the difference. Is a great vocal performance.
At this period of time, because he's also his coloring is darker.
Yes.
Because Jar Jar has got kind of orangish pinkish notes that maybe it's the coloring. Maybe there's something about darker characters where they fill into the space better.
It's also a kind of comfort knowing where the movie's going when you see him.
Yeah.
Because you see him, you're like, okay, wacky races. Here we go.
Right.
For the next half hour.
I mean, you're also benefited by the fact that George Lucas can't resist poor Jake Lloyd to say, hey, don't do that. You might get hurt for our next pod race.
Yeah, so suddenly you're thrust into, Le Mans with Steve McQueen or one of those Grand Prix movies, which is clearly, and basically this is another way in which this movie is personal to George Lucas. A big part of this movie is about one of his hobbies, which is fixing up old cars and racing cars. So and that's what the next 20 minutes is going to be about.
Yeah, it's all he's just throwing his biggest dreams up onto the screen,
It's really, at this point, because you cast, Hugh McGregor isn't a huge film star, but he's relatively well known. Obviously, Liam Neeson, even at this point, still bigger. Oh, he's had Schindler's List, so he's a much bigger star. Because there's hardly any Obi-Wan. He stays behind in the ship.
You're right.
And it's all Qui-Gon. And looking back at it now, and knowing that they never hid the fact that Qui-Gon was a one-shot deal, he was going to die at the end of the movie, because the soundtrack came out before the movie, and one of the tracks is The Death of Qui-Gon.
Death of Qui-Gon, right.
So they didn't care about spoilers like that back then, but the film is actually setting that up, because why would you spend so much time with him?
Why would you follow him for so long, right?
At the expense of Obi-Wan, this legacy character that we know, is because he's not going to be in the next movie, and it's all going to be about Obi-Wan, so it kind of lays the pipe for that, I think. Yeah, so wacky races was one of the things I thought of. Also, the Flintstones, the place that right. Shmi and Anakin live. I was like, they're supposed to look like tenement rock buildings.
Yeah,
and that immediately made me thought of that collision of the modern and the prehistoric in the. I don't think that's what they were going for, but I went Flintstones. Wilma.
Oh man.
And here's where we get introduced to 3PO.
Yeah. Well, again, for me, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't work, no. He's a bunch of wires, right, at this point?
Yeah.
We won't see him for a whole movie.
Yeah.
Or the space of a whole movie. It's also, I think the biggest problem with this, and that you might agree with this, is that it's an origin story that no one expects or wants for 3PO.
Right, exactly.
And that's, to me, is in direct contrast to R2-D2, where it's like, oh yeah, this is what I figured. This is where I figured he came from. He was part of an astromech team. And he got singled out. But this is sort of like, Darth Vader built.
Yeah,
C-3PO.
I think you've won me over. You've won me over on
R2-D2. Tatooine. C-3PO was built on Tatooine in a slave's house. I mean, all of it.
It just feels a bit too much.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it's... Yeah, it really didn't, and it's one of those things that really didn't have to be this way. Like, there's so many ways you could have introduced C-3PO in a way that was organic and still aside from the fact that, he can meet whoever he wants because he's going to get his mind wiped. But R2-D2 shouldn't be meeting all these people.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Because he's going to remember and recognize them.
He could tell his friends things. Because he's seen some shit. So I guess that was my part of my original argument against R2-D2, because he doesn't have his mind wiped. So we didn't even need. And
that's bizarre.
We didn't need Ben Kenobi. R2-D2 could have said, "I know who your dad is, by the way." Could have just told Luke right away.
I know. It's.
I've heard the stories about the guy they had to put into a dark black helmet. That guy's your dad.
Yeah. Again, so we get to the dinner. We cut away to Coruscant for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
At this, because we don't have Rick Ollier to tell us about the geography, it's just this kind
Right.
of urban sci-fi noir city
Mm-hmm.
that could potentially be the city where the Sith live. Like, it's introduced in a way that
Yeah.
it's not clear that it's the capital city of the Republic. I guess maybe that's the plot twist in George's mind, that
You think?
you think it's this evil place, and then you realize it's the home of the Senate, which
Yeah.
is his idea of satire. And another Full House catchphrase uttered by Jar Jar. He says, "How
I
rude."
didn't watch a
He
lot of
said,
Full House.
"Excuse me," and "How rude." That's why you that's why you're so smart. Oh, I am a gibbering idiot. Um, but that is the button. First of all, a Full House catchphrase. That's two in one movie and a Star Wars movie. But also, Anakin's telling a story about how his body has a bomb in it that will go off if he tries to escape, and the button for that is Jar Jar going, "How rude!" And this is where Jar Jar really strikes me as the most photoshoppable character in the history of cinema.
Mm.
Like, removing him from these scenes would change nothing about them,
Oh yeah,
because he's
we'd
not
be fine.
contributing anything. I mean, it could, they could just ADR in the line where Qui-Gon says, "I'm really glad I caught that fly." Because all he does is catch Jar Jar's tongue.
Tongue. Yeah.
And it says, "It was weird when you said, 'Don't do that again to that fly.'" I know. The Jedi can communicate with all kinds of creatures. See, I've already fixed it.
Creatures big and small.
That's right, the smallest of... a Patreon exclusive. Even the
Yeah.
smallest of creatures.
It's a long dinner scene, though, isn't it?
I like the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And again, maybe just, you know, maybe my expectations are pretty low at this point for what can be achieved through dialogue, but I thought it was
Yeah.
quite good as it goes. Like, it felt like a real interaction that qualified as dialogue. That is a low bar, isn't it? I just realized as I said. I think it qualifies as dialogue. Yeah, that's really setting the bar very low.
It is indeed.
I love one of the made up space names that I love here is the Bunta Eve Classic.
Yeah.
Because that's just all you can think about is adolescent George Lucas. And I guess some of the sort of like he's sort of what's the word? He's kind of canvassing onto Anakin his love of cars and racing, and also the fact that he was considered like a child prodigy.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was like he made all his achievements were made really young.
Right.
As a film director, he was doing stuff younger than everyone else, I think,
Mm-hmm.
of his
Right.
and so I think both those things are. I think he's a surrogate for Anakin.
At the forefront of his
Anakin's a
mind.
surrogate for him.
For
Well,
him. Yeah.
actually, the first one was better. The better description of it. Anakin. George Lucas is a surrogate for Anakin. This is also where we get into the first real characterization of Qui-Gon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's in the one of the reasons I think this scene is a little better than the scenes we've had before. I know it goes on a while, but there is some sense of character development, like what sort of individualizes Qui-Gon a little bit more.
Yeah, but I also think you get a real sense of Anakin himself.
Yeah. But just the sense that he's both he's street smart because he talks about the pod racing on other planets. Mm-hmm. He's a bit of a hippie rebel.
Yeah.
But he's also he's a tough guy because he's sort of talks about killing people.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's a bit more. That's more information than we've had up until this point in the entire movie of what Qui-Gon is like as a character, as opposed to just an archetype of the Jedi Master. Like, he's this particular kind of Jedi Master, and I guess that's important once we get to Coruscant because it's his contrast with the rest of the Jedi Council that
right. I was going to say because we
carries.
haven't really got to the part yet. I don't think we haven't had any part where Obi-Wan's mentioned you're going to divide the council again. We haven't got that sense yet, right? Because we get that when they go back to Coruscant.
Right. At this point,
Yeah.
I guess we're just
But
sort
he's a
of
bit of a maverick.
he's a bit of a maverick, and then I think we get the point so far that it's like rebellious parent, conservative child, sort of a family ties situation.
Mm-hmm.
But we know from what we've seen in the Star Wars movies that Obi-Wan's going to end up more like Qui-Gon when he gets older, because he's also going to be a bit of a rebel and a hippie
Yeah.
and a maverick to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy just as happy in the cantina as he is meditating in a cave.
Sure.
And we see more of that in the next movie, and I fucking love it. See Obi-Wan in a bar looking like he belongs there. So good.
It's great. Well, can we talk about midi-chlorians?
Is that where we are?
Yeah.
Oh, I was having so much
I
fun.
want to know your reaction the first time you heard this.
Well, I mean, even before you get to that, he'd ask who's the father. It says there was no father. I was like, ooh.
Oh, is that before that? You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're right.
So we basically,
because I wrote down Anakin is Jesus. What the fuck?
Yeah, I mean that's essentially it. Like, I guess, and again, if you want to give it the benefit of the doubt, the way in which you could say Darth Vader is a biblical character because he's like Lazarus, right? He's a sort of fallen angel.
Mm-hmm.
But then I guess he starts out as Anakin, who is Jesus.
Right. So
you're kind of confusing your religious metaphors there. But yeah, it's like clear Christian allegory, and it really took me aback. But from go to that to, I mean, let's call it what it is, eugenics, master race theory, adding on the mythology that there's something biologically specific about the Jedi.
The other thing that's like, even the actor, what's her name? Pernia August?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even feel like she quite buys it as she's saying it. You know what I mean? It's as though she's thinking in her mind.
But it's...
Sorry, everyone. This is fucking nuts. Sorry.
Yeah. I want to go back to Denmark where they write scripts properly. Being a bleak TV police procedural.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is, you're being buffered between two extremes of science and faith. So Anakin's Anakin's virgin birth and then his biological genetic superiority, one after the other, it doesn't make sense.
Well, and on top of that, and I say this as a not religious person, but there was always something. I always liked the idea of Jedis feeling the Force, letting the Force flow through them. You're near another Jedi and you think the Force is strong with this one. It was based on feeling. It was based on emotion. It wasn't clinical.
Oh, it was total. It was Buddhism.
Yeah, totally.
Which shares mythologies with Christianity, but it not faith systems.
Mm-hmm.
So that is
anyway. Just like the right turn into
literally a right turn, a turn into Nazism,
right, and into science. I hate it.
It's interesting, and again, like, if you when
George science is more the midi-chlorian, but anyway.
No, but so there's nothing wrong with it in essence because this is science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Science fiction fantasy, so you could do a fantasy thing like they're making him Jesus, or you could do a science thing by making have little blood cells that are talking to each other inside you,
right?
But juxtaposing them, and for those to be atypical of the mythology as we know it, those are the problems for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not you should be able to do that within the genre, absolutely fine, but it's just misjudged how they do it.
Okay.
And then, of course, they sort of, like many things in The Phantom Menace, they walk away from it and then double down on it simultaneously.
Yeah.
So
I guess for me, it's also, if you listen to George Lucas, he's talks about the mythology of Jedis. He's like, so this is just a thing. This is just a thing we added. we added this about the Jedis, and that there's this other part of Jedis. And I keep thinking, you don't even realize you're shitting on the first 3 movies you did, though.
Well, also George Lucas, he sometimes responds the way that fans do when they get defensive about the Star
Mm-hmm.
Wars sequels. You know, the illogical plot turns in the Star Wars sequels, of which there are many,
Sure.
and they get really defensive of it and say, "Well, just because a character on screen said it doesn't mean it's true." And that's exactly what
Right.
George Lucas says about midichlorians. If asked now, he's like, "Well, Qui-Gon believed it was true. That doesn't mean it's true. The Jedi's figured out that that wasn't what it was. It was something different. It was just a
Even though
theory."
they have a test.
Also, and this is what makes me question why they can't fix their hyperdrive. They can transmit blood samples wirelessly.
Right.
Also, I mean, do you know what they're actually using? What that they use
Uh-uh.
to collect the sample? That's a lady shave razor.
That's fantastic.
You don't know what to do with that information, do you?
Nope. I almost ended the show on that one.
um. Oh well. Here's a good spot to end. I think
Okay.
Darth Maul arrives in his ship,
Yeah.
which looks
And he's
cool.
going to send out some droids.
He looks cool visually. He looks fearsome, which is what we
Mm-hmm.
want. Vocal work is excellent. The great Peter Serafanowicz
Right.
doing a fabulous job vocally.
Sorry,
So he's
Ray. We don't trust your voice.
Ray Parks.
Yeah.
Didn't they use it in Solo though? Eventually, or is that still
I
someone else? Is it like
I
a
don't
Darth
remember.
Vader situation where
Yeah.
David Prowse is in there the whole time and they take it off? It's just some guy. But anyway, but like it's all aesthetic. Like there's nothing
Mm-hmm.
beyond. Like you're going, yeah, he looks good. He looks cool. The ship
Right.
is great. He's scary. He sounds cool. He sounds
That's
scary. But
that's
but
the
it's all
one.
surface.
Yeah, it's one of the fundamental
It's all
problems
reflective surface.
with this movie, and it's jumping ahead, but like with his death, but his introduction to his death, part of what makes the original Star Wars trilogy works is because you have a villain you can root against the whole time. His name, by the way, is Darth Vader.
Hmm. But this is
I
my
mean,
new apprentice, Darth
right,
Maul,
exactly, yeah. And so we
cousin
have,
Oliver.
I think this movie, through his introduction, and we just don't get to know enough about him, and then the next thing you know, he's gone. And what we needed was,
Not
I
gone
think,
though, is he? He's
well,
it's a life of
he's going to be a crawling robot, I
subjective
guess.
to a life of robot legs, like many
Yeah.
like many a Star Wars character.
But I think that this original trilogy could have benefited greatly from a villain we could have hated for 3 movies.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then when it found possibly the greatest screen villain of all time, hold on to him.
Right. Right.
It's like we've accepted that for some reason Sidious has a 90-year-old apprentice. Doesn't make sense. It's Christopher Lee. Just
Yeah.
don't kill him. Don't. Oh, you killed him.
I swear to God. I mean, we're not there yet, but the second he speaks, I said, now this is a motherfucker who can do that dialogue.
Isn't it amazing? Oh well, yeah. We will.
We're
we
not
will,
there. Let's save it.
Yeah, he's not in this. But I think the tragedy. Have you heard the tragedy of Darth Maul? the
But
tragedy.
again, it's one of those things. It's a misstep. It's a miscalculation.
Well, the
I think.
tragedy of Darth Maul is that there's such potential to the character. I mean, when you saw him in the trailer, you were like, "Oh, just tell me about this guy."
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
And you
I
never
want
get
this.
told about that guy.
Yeah, and it's not that I want backstory or finding out about his species or anything like that. I
No,
just want
yeah.
him to interact with the movie on a level other than aesthetics.
Yes,
Is
exactly.
that too much to ask?
I'm not asking for too much, am I?
Can
I
I
don't
end?
know.
Can I end this episode by saying
Go ahead.
There's a scene in Mos Espa that begins with an establishing shot, and in the background, a droid is pulling an OP who is pulling some cargo. So
Oh
effectively,
yeah, yeah.
in the background, there's a political cartoon going on. I half expected to see like a little signature at the bottom of it.
That's great. Oh shit. Well, we're about to get to our pod race, and
Mm-hmm.
as if our audience hasn't guessed, we like talking about the Star Wars films.
Yeah.
So let's take a break, friend.
Yeah, they've already
And
seen when they downloaded the episode, it'll say part 1 or something like that.
yeah,
So
exactly.
this,
This is the part where we stop.
we're already longer than the average episode, I think.
Yeah. So when we come back next week, we're going to get into the pod race and everything about the pod race. Fuck, I love that pod race.
And I have one word to say to you about that.
Go ahead.
Wizard.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Wizard! Have you seen this movie?
Yeah.
Anakin says that's wizard.
When?
It means that's cool in the on Tatooine. Wizard.
Holy shit.
You're welcome to
Oh,
cut all that out where you didn't know one of the most famous lines from the movie.
Is it?
Or you can keep it in. It's up to you. You're the sound editor.
That's right. I'll do whatever I want. Thank you.
Of course you're right. Of course you're right.
Yes. You loved that.
Subscribe to our subscribe to our Patreon if you want to know what the hell we're talking about.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is part 1 of The Phantom Menace. Stay tuned next week. We're going to finish up. And we got more to say, obviously. Anything left for you, Tom?
I don't care what universe you're from. That's gotta hurt.
All right. Well, for Tom Stewart of Lonesome Whistle Productions, Michael Shantz here. I'm from the How Dare You Awards. When you hear us next time, part 2
of part
of
1.
The Phantom Menace. Yeah,
Part
2
2.
of part 1.
Part 2 of episode 1.
All right. You want to say goodbye again?
No, I'm content with my original.
Very good then.
I know something about beer, but nowadays even I get overwhelmed when confronted by the exhaustive selection of craft beers they have at bars, breweries, and even grocery stores. Back in the day you had 1, maybe 2 craft beers to choose from, and if you were confused, you ordered a Guinness. But in beerstinations like San Diego, the craft beer options lately are in double, sometimes even triple digits. So what's a beer drinker to do? You need what I need, the Vegas Beer Guys. Your beer of choice should be a perfect blend of malt and hops. And so a live